Emory Hunt of CBS Sports joins us today to talk Giants OTAs and what we've learned so far. That's coming your way next on the Locked On Giants podcast.
You are Locked On Giants, your daily New York Giants podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Today's episode of the Locked On Giants podcast is brought to you by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use the promo code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off your first purchase. Last minute tickets, lowest prices guaranteed. Hello, New York Giant fans, and welcome to another edition of the Locked On Giants podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast family, your team every day. I'm Patricia Traynor, your host, credential member of the New York Giants media for Locked On, as well as for New York Giants on SI. Find our written work over at si.com/NFL/Giants, and welcome on into my Blue Crew community members, my everydayers, my newcomers, and everybody in between. Thank you so much for spending part of your day with us here on the Locked On Giants podcast. And on today's show, as promised, I have for you Emory Hunt. He is a football analyst for CBS Sports. He is also the czar of the playbook over at Football Gameplan. Really knowledgeable guy. Love that he does his homework and always happy to have him on the program. Emory, good morning, my friend. Good to see you.
Good morning, Patty. Always a pleasure to talk ball with you.
Always as well. I enjoy having you on as well. Emory, we're going to talk Giants as always, of course. And you have been at the OTAs, as have I, the last couple. And there's one, of course, coming up today on Thursday. It's the last OTA before the mandatory minicamp next week. But, what I always tell my listeners is that as much as I try to watch everything, it's impossible to watch everything. So it's always good to get another person on who has been there as well to have different perspectives and whatnot. And I want to start off, if I could, by getting your general takeaways on what we have seen. Two practices, obviously, but, still a lot going on. What have we seen that really has stood out to you so far?
There's a lot of quickness at receiver for the Giants this year. I feel like they have a bunch of guys that can, create right off the bat, create that separation, create their own shot, so to speak. Good run after the catch guys. We talk about Neighbors, you talk about Wan'Dale Robinson, you talk about Jalen Hyatt. There's some speed and quickness there within this receiving core. So that's been something that really has stood out to me between the couple of practices that we've been able to attend. And on the flip side of that, you look at the secondary. I feel like that's because you kind of ignore, or at least I do. I ignore the O-line and D-line during these glorified passing camps because there's nothing you can really take from both the offensive line and defensive line without pads on. So I'm just really watching the skill players. And I feel like the receivers, just from a quickness standpoint, could pose some issues for teams if they don't have the ability to make open field tackles or have the quickness and the explosiveness to match some of what the Giants can present at the receiving core.
Yeah, you mentioned, the receiving core, and obviously all eyes have been on Malik Neighbors and what he brings to the table. Now, you, of course, studied Malik as part of your annual draft analysis and whatnot. We look at the speed and the raw talent and whatnot, but what realistically does he have to adjust to that maybe he wasn't doing in college that he's going to need to do at this level?
That's a great question because I feel like with his skill set and what he showed in college that he can play across the board. So obviously being able to cross train and master multiple positions as opposed to the Giants perhaps sticking him to one side or one spot. And I don't think Daboll will do that because I know Daboll understands, matchups and how to get guys in position to have success. So just making sure he's able to understand and grasp all the positions that he's going to have to play, in my opinion, that's where, because physically he's done everything. And let's say you want to see him maybe get off bump press, better or whatnot. We won't know that at these camps. So we won't be able to see where he has to improve physically until they get the pads on. But just from a schematic standpoint, you want him to be able to master, both outside spots and also slot receiver duties as well.
Sticking with, receiver for a moment, another guy that kind of, jumped out at everybody last year and then he kind of faded away for whatever the reason was Jalen Hyatt. So same question to you. I mean, when you look at what he was asked to do at Tennessee and then, what he had to adjust to at the NFL level and how he continues to build up here, what do you think is going to be the biggest thing he needs to show in order to take a step forward, get more targets his way?
Well, and again, we'll see this when he gets the pads on, being able to play through contact. We know that was a big thing for him coming out of college. He was a lighter, slender build receiver. And you kind of want him to be able to handle the physical rigors you'll see at the NFL level with the secondary. They're going to try to get hands on you. And being able to fight through that contact is going to be key for him. And that's where I'm excited to see the growth from him in his second season once they get the pads on, because we've seen the flashes of him being able to get past the secondary, being able to get down the field, being able to make those plays that they drafted him to make, but on a consistent down-to-down basis, being a little bit more physical is where he can definitely grow his game. But we won't see that at an OTA or mini camp or something like that.
Right, right. And Emery, a lot of people seem to think that Darius Slayton needs to go, that he's a guy that the Giants should look to trade, that there's not going to be any room for him on this offense. I don't necessarily share that opinion, but I want to get your take as to, now with Neighbors on board, he's a legitimate number one receiver or can develop into a number one receiver. So where does Darius Slayton fit in? How does his role potentially change amongst the passing game?
Honestly, you could potentially see the best version of Darius Slayton because he's not going to be asked to be a number one, and he's best suited as a 2 or 3 on a football team. And now you have a bona fide number one in Malik Neighbors, so it pushes everyone down to their more natural position, whether it's a slot position or as a 2 or a 3. So you still can get the production from a Slayton. And if we're being completely honest, who has the most rapport with Daniel Jones? It's Darius Slayton. And so therefore he still will have a role on his team. And also you like the fact that he's kind of, he's going through the mud a little bit, come out on the other side consistently, and has put up some solid numbers for a guy that's essentially a 2 or a 3, but had been thrust into sort of a 1B role on a team. But now with Neighbors, you kind of bring him back down to a 2 or a 3. And I do feel like that's where we can see him kind of own that spot. So there's I think you still have to keep Slayton, before anything else. I think you don't move off him because he has a report to start the quarterback, and he's going to be playing a more natural position outside of Neighbors and Hyatt. He can even contend for that slot role, to be completely honest.
Switching over to the running game, obviously no Saquon Barkley, so those reps are all going to be up for grabs, not just the rushing attempts, but the receiving attempts out of the backfield. How do you kind of see that shaping up at this juncture?
This is the biggest offensive concern for me, for the Giants, because one, the Giants don't have the same threat in the backfield that they did with Saquon Barkley. So teams that come in defensively are, they're going to be able to defend the Giants a little bit better because they don't have that guy that they fear in the backfield. Now, can a guy emerge? Sure. But when you look at this Giants depth chart, I feel like all of these guys are of the same caliber in terms of being able to catch the football. They're good in rotation. So maybe we'll see the Giants work 3 guys in the fold and won't really have a true bell cow in that aspect, just to have some run game, but won't be predicated on the run game, if that makes sense. And so it's going to be like having this depth chart in terms of who's the lead guy, because none of these guys have been the lead guy. Singletary would be the closest one, and he was that in Houston for a little bit, but everyone else has split carries everywhere they've been, even in college. So Tracy is the bigger of the backs that we see with the Giants right now. And so and he's 5'11", 210 pounds or something like that. So I feel like this is a big question mark coming in. We know they all can catch. We know they are all good receivers out of the backfield, but can they, hold down the run game either individually or collectively as a group? That's going to be what I'm going to be most interested in during training camp, because I feel like this is the most this is the glaring area of the offense that no one is talking about.
And pivoting from that, Emory, obviously you want to have a decent running game. You want to have a good passing game. So with the questions surrounding the running game, how does that potentially affect the quarterback position?
It's going to put a lot of pressure on the quarterback to have to play above the X's and O's. You're going to have to really, you're going to learn a lot about your quarterback if they don't have that benefit of the run game. And just to give an example, we've seen, like, look at Cincinnati. You lose Joe Mixon, and you got Zach Moss, and you have Chase Brown. You hope Tech steps up this year in his second season out of Illinois. But man, thank God you have Joe Burrow, and you have those receivers, because Burrow can sit back there and throw the football 35, 40 times, and you could trust that, okay, he's going to get the job done. You don't want him to do that, but he can do that. That's in his bag. So let's use that logic for the Giants. You probably don't want Daniel Jones throwing the ball 25, 30 times a game. You want to have someone to take the pressure off of him. So if you don't have that, or if defenses don't feel like you have that, now they're going to, hey, Daniel Jones, go out there and beat us, because we're going to make sure you have zero run game. And now the onus is going to be on Daniel Jones to really win games with his arm and beat coverage and be able to make some tight window throws, be able to push the football vertically down the field to alleviate the box so they can run the football. So them not having a game breaker per se in the backfield puts a ton of pressure on Daniel Jones. That's why this is going to be huge for them, to make sure they find someone that they can kind of lean on to keep the defense honest. Because if not, then you don't have the guy, in my opinion, to really say, hey, okay, we could trust him 30 to 35 times a game to toss the ball around the yard. I just think that this is a huge concern. If you're Daniel Jones, you kind of want somebody that can run the football.
Speaking of Daniel Jones, he's not doing 11 on 11. He's been basically working against air, doing individuals. He's been doing, 7 on 7. What have you, how does he look to you right now?
Listen, and again, I'm not comparing my multiple torn ACLs to Daniel Jones torn ACL, but I think he looks good moving around, considering it's a torn ACL. But we're talking about a 20-year gap from when I tore mine, 24-year gap from when I tore mine to where we are now. And we know the medical advancements in recovery and how the surgery goes with the ACL. So I was, to see him moving around like he is, in terms of just in the pocket, and he doesn't have dead leg, doesn't look like, he's doing more lower body shuffling to try to get his body to work through that. He's walking normal. He's not laboring. You don't really see him come out just to give it a break. He's going the full 7-on-7 period. And so, the recovery has been phenomenal. And, and it's going about as what you wanted to see, going about as good as you wanted to see for someone coming off that injury. Now, granted, there's no 11 on 11, and there's no play action pass where he's rolling out and throwing on a run. But just from a straight drop back and how he's moving, if you told me he tore his ACL, I would be like, really? Because I don't even think he's wearing a brace.
No.
So he has a sleeve on, a compression sleeve, but I mean, he looks like he lost some weight, which is normal, but good in a good way. He's more like leaned up a little bit, I feel like. So we'll see if when he goes to that next step of playing 11 on 11, how he really moves. But for right now, there's you got to be optimistic about what you're seeing from a dude that's he tore his ACL in October, November. So that's just crazy to think about. Later in the season, a torn ACL, and he's able to get out there and move around like that. So I say, like, kudos to modern medicine, because these guys are coming back quicker from these injuries than ever before.
For sure, for sure. All right, we've got more coming up with Emory Hunt of CBS Sports and Football Game Plan. Don't go anywhere, Giant fans. Hey, Giant fans. With the dead period coming up in the NFL calendar, I'm really looking forward to catching some shows and concerts in the area. And no matter what event I end up choosing, I never have to worry about getting tickets thanks to Game Time. With Game Time, there are always great seats available at competitive prices. They even offer last minute money saving deals, and they take away the guesswork as far as fees, seat views, and other aspects that can make ticket buying a nightmare. Game Time even offers event cancellation protection, and if you find tickets elsewhere in the same section and row for less, Game Time will give you 110% of the difference. So go on and get the event tickets you've been wanting. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use the promo code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off your first purchase. Last minute tickets, lowest prices guaranteed. Terms apply. All right, everybody, welcome back to the Locked On Giants podcast. I'm your host, Patricia Trainer, with special guest Emory Hunt of CBS Sports Football Game Plan. He is the czar of the playbook, and he has been absolutely amazing. He's been at the Giants OTAs like I have, and just really a fountain of knowledge. And I'm so glad to have him on with us. And speaking of OTAs, on tomorrow's show, I will have for you all the takeaways from the next Giants OTA. I think we're up to OTA number 9 or 10. I forget. I lose track, but it's coming to the end. It's the last OTA, and then we have the mandatory minicamp coming the following week. So I will have all that coverage for you. And Emory, you said earlier in the program that you don't really pay much attention to the offensive and defensive lines because it's not padded practice, it's not contact. But I want to talk about the offensive line and the potential lineup, because one of the things we've seen at guard, we've seen John Runyon Jr. at right guard as opposed to left guard, a position that he has said that he's a little bit more comfortable playing, and Jermaine Illuminor at left guard. Do you see the logic in flipping that around? I mean, I know Carmen Brasillo, the offensive line coach, said, we want to get Jermaine a little bit of, guard experience because he played tackle for us at the Raiders last year. But do you see the logic behind flipping the two of them? We thought, Runyon would be left guard, Illuminor right guard, and they flipped it.
Yeah, there's definitely logic behind it because we know how NFL season goes. You only have so many linemen dressed on game day, active, and you may need a guy to step into a position that he's not quote unquote comfortable playing. So why not get him those mental reps, those muscle memory reps now in OTA? So if he has to go in there during a season, it's not foreign to him, and he can step in and be like, okay, I did this in OTAs. I'm familiar with the guy next to me. I understand what his calls are like. I understand when he's going to pass guys off. I understand his movements. It's all about building that level of muscle memory and continuity now. So therefore, if you do have to go to it in the regular season, you could step in right away and play well and don't have any concerns. And I would say from a Luminor perspective, in terms of him playing tackle and moving the guard, well, when you think about a tackle, you think of their ability in pass pro, right? So why not get him inside where you now have a quote unquote pass pro guard, right? So it's about getting how can we put the best 5 out there? How can we cross train guys? How can we, give certain looks? Maybe we'll be stronger on our left side in terms of pass pro, and more so than on the right side, where we can really run the football and whatnot. So I understand the logic behind it, and it's still OTAs. And this is when you kind of want to play around with guys just going through the physical motions, and try it out, because we know once you put the pads on, then it becomes real. So we may see a little bit of it when they put the pads on, but right now it makes sense to get those guys used to moving their body certain ways at different positions.
What about the impact of the tackles? I mean, obviously Andrew Thomas at left tackle, he's solid. So to put Illuminor next to him and let him get up to speed on playing left guard, not necessarily a bad idea. And then on the other side, you have Evan Neal, who, as we know, has struggled. You put Runyon, who's, an accomplished guard, next to him. Maybe that helps Evan Neal. I mean, is that part of the equation, do you think?
And health helps Evan Neal more so than anything, and I feel like that's where that's another under discussed part of this whole offseason, where Evan Neal was dealing with all those injuries. and now he's healthy. So when we know this, when we seen a healthy Evan Neal as a college prospect, we know that he was a dominant player, and that's why he was a first round pick. So you just don't forget how to play football at a high level. And now that we know the injuries that he was dealing with, maybe that's why they felt a little bit more comfortable. Hey, man, let's move around some of these pieces because we got a healthy Evan Neal. Because to my point earlier, if Evan Neal proves to be inconsistent, well, Illuminor can play tackle and Runyon can go back to left guard. So why not see if this could be your starting five right now while everyone is at 100% here in OTAs?
Emory, it's expected that Darren Waller is going to call it a career, that he's going to retire. And despite the health issues that he had last year, he was still targeted the third most on the team. And I think the ninth most amongst tight ends in the league last year. I know some people are going to say, well, you can't replace what you don't have. But how do the Giants potentially replace Darren Waller and the production that he was able to give them when he was healthy?
They hope it's Theo Johnson, the rookie out of Penn State, who's more of the receiving type of a threat. Penn State had two tight ends that are NFL players. One went back, and we saw Theo Johnson, obviously come out, get drafted, and so on and so forth. So I'm saying that to say he is used to playing in a tandem, and the tandem is going to be him and Bellinger. Bellinger, we know, has had some success here with New York. Theo Johnson, that's the best way for him to get involved, is to be that sidecar to Bellinger and really be the receiving threat while Bellinger could work inside in line as a blocker. I think that's how you kind of replace Darren Waller and what he brought to the table, the threat of him being that receiving threat. You still have that with guys like Bellinger. I'm a big Cager guy. I do think he has some good receiving ability. We know they also have Tyree Jackson, converted quarterback. If he can stay healthy, that's the biggest question with him. But Theo Johnson is going to be that guy that, quote unquote, replaces Waller to pair up with Bellinger.
Yeah, that's what I'm thinking as well. Now I want to flip to the defensive side of the ball here because, I want to start with defensive line. We look at defensive line and we say there's Dexter Lawrence and there's everybody else. But truthfully, you look at the depth on the defensive line. It seems like they have a lot of potential nose tackles, but maybe defensive ends is a little scarce. Maybe they've got Ryder Anderson. I guess this guy Jordan Phillips can play defensive end. But how do you? And I know it's early, you got to put the pads on and everything, but potentially speaking, how do you see that defensive front shaping up, taking shape as far as the lineup might go?
Boogie Basham is someone that people need to keep an eye on. Was a big fan of him coming out of college. I thought, him going to Buffalo, coming out of Wake Forest, was going to be why they got Russo, they got Boogie Basham, they were building something, depth and something special out there in Buffalo. Obviously, they find a way to get him here. But you got, Thibodeau, Brian Burns, edge guys, defensive line. You probably could slide Basham in there if you want to get another pass rusher out there. But what Basham brings that I think is underrated is his ability to anchor down and play the run. He can play the run on the way to the quarterback. So he's a good point of attack guy. And that allows you to get more speed on the field with Burns and Thibodeau. Thibodeau did a good job last year anchoring down, holding his side down. But Lawrence is what really makes everything go because he gets that interior pressure, which causes, the guys to pinch in and try to double in, which leaves those guys on the outside one-on-one. So they have those guys, but you bring up Jordan Phillips, you bring up Jordan Riley, another depth guy that can come in and help on the interior, as well as Nacho, out there, Raheem Nunez-Roches can get out there and rotate. DJ Davidson, they drafted, they like a lot. So the rotation is going to be fine, depth guys, but I feel like your big cogs are going to be Phillips, Riley, and Basham to help surround what they have in a superstar in Dexter Lawrence.
Yeah, I agree with you. Boogie Basham is somebody who really not a role for him last year. They acquired him, and I don't think they ever really had a set plan for him. And then, this year, maybe in this defensive scheme, there will be a set plan for him. And another guy who I never got a sense that they really had a true plan for him that I think is going to have a bigger role. Isaiah Simmons. What kind of role do you see for him in this defense?
I'm glad they brought him back, right? Because he had a really good year last year. Um, because he was one of those guys that you thought was going to usher in a new wave of defender where he can do so many different things. He was super athletic, could play all three backer spots. You even trusted him back in coverage, sometimes even deep in coverage as a safety. So he had all of these athletic and crossover skill sets, but just couldn't really find a way to hammer down. I thought him working with Wink Martindale was great because we saw him make some plays on that Giants defense. Now we'll see how he'll do with Shane Bowen and how he utilizes these athletic gifts that he brings to the table. I do feel like he's your classic, game day matchup piece where, okay, this week we just need you to be a blitzer. This week we're facing an athletic, tight end. We need you to match up and cover him. We don't want to bring in an extra defensive back and be, weaker versus the run. You can, keep us strong versus the run, but also athletic enough to cover the tight end. They're facing an athletic tailback that loves to get out and pass the game. He could be that matchup guy. So I feel like his role will be predicated on who they face that week. And that's a good problem to have because now you don't have to be forced to put an extra DB out there or different personnel out there because you have one guy that can do multiple things. So I'm glad they brought him back. I still believe in his athletic talent, and we'll see how Shane Bowen utilizes him out there on the field.
All right, we got more coming up with Emory Hunt right after this quick break. All right, everybody, welcome back to the Locked On Giants podcast. I'm your host, Patricia Trainer, with special guests, Emory Hunt, CBS Sports Football Game Plan, the czar of the playbook. And Emory, at the end of the last segment, you mentioned the defensive backs and how Isaiah Simmons can maybe give the Shane Bowen some flexibility by not having to put an extra DB out there. And I want to talk about the DBs because, that's a very young group, I guess you could say unproven. Really Deontay Banks is coming back. Jason Pinnock is coming back. Potentially you might have a rookie and Tyler Newman playing that other safety spot that was vacated when Xavier McKinney left. Cordell Flott right now is projected to be the CB2. Does that lineup right now cause you any concerns, or do you see potential in that lineup to be great?
Both can be true. You could see potential, but you also have to be concerned because Deontay Banks is a really good corner. And maybe he's more along the lines of a CB2 as opposed to a CB1. We'll see if he can really solidify himself as a CB1 this year. But so what that means is that everyone else is probably playing a position above where they should, right? So maybe Flott should be a slot guy. Maybe Phillips should be, someone that comes in and spells maybe in dime packages. You got to find a guy that you can trust to be a bona fide corner opposite of Banks. And that's where the challenge is going to be. And so far in camp, we've also seen them utilize Nick McLeod in how I describe a role for Isaiah Simmons. If I'm a running back and I see Nick McLeod, down in the box, I'm licking my chops because I trust my lineman or tight end to get on him and escort him out the way. He may be a good tackler of receivers in the open field, but man, when you're trying to push him down inside to be more of that nickel defender, in terms of stopping the run or being in the box, that could be an issue. So I still feel like this is a work in progress. So this is another, and I'm glad you brought it up because this is another position group where a lot of focus will be on, from my eyes, during padded practices, because running back and the defensive backfield is where the Giants really have some glaring questions, concerns. They have talent, but on the defense side, what we're talking about now is youthful talent, a lot of unproven guys that, one, got to stay healthy, or two, prove that they can be healthy. You depended on two real rookies to come in and start. Drew Phillips, the nickelback of Kentucky, and Newman, you brought up out of Minnesota, who hadn't really been getting a lot of reps during OTAs. Maybe they're letting him slowly grasp things from a conceptual perspective and see it first before they actively throw him out there. But you're right, they're expecting him to potentially start because we know he has ball skills. So there's some concerns here, but this is where You got to see how the physical part of it plays out, and we won't get to that in the past. I will say, just from watching these guys run around and cover, you don't see rarely, and I say rarely because it was the two highlight plays. The busted coverage where Neighbors is like 60 yards ahead of the defensive back, but for the most part, these dudes are running lockstep with these receivers. You don't see much separation. So athletically, you're excited because they're able to match up. And we know Wink Martindale's defense predicated on press and getting hands on guys. So watching these guys move in Bowen's defense without really focusing on are they getting hands on these receivers, they're able to hold up athletically and run around with these guys. And that's always a great thing.
I find it interesting, and this is not meant to be a slap at Cordell Flott or anybody, but Jerome Henderson spoke about having confidence in Cordell Flott. Brian Daboll spoke about it. But then I go back to the offseason and I say to myself, okay, you tried to sign two veteran cornerbacks, White and I forget the other guy's name. He was with Jacksonville, if I'm not mistaken. You tried to sign guys to fill that spot. And you weren't able to for whatever the reasons. So now it's like, okay, well, we've got confidence in what we've got there. And I don't know, for me, that's just, that's not sitting right with me, because it's like, if you had this confidence all along, why bother to bring guys in? I mean, am I crazy for thinking that?
No, it's the same thing you're saying in regards to what the talk was with the quarterback position, right? Yeah, he's our guy. He's our guy, unquestioned starter. It's tough to say that after you spend all that resources trying to find the guy to replace that guy, right? And it's the same thing that you're talking about with cornerback. And that's why you kind of have to take that wait and see approach, because it's hard for me to believe what you say because I've seen what you do. Shout out to James Baldwin.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, for sure. I mean, I hope it works out. I like Cordell Flott, but I'm a little concerned about whether he can hold up to the physical aspect of it. I mean, in the past, he hasn't, but I guess there's always a first time for everything. I mean, I want to go back to a bigger picture question, and that is, who's going to be calling the plays for this team? Now, I still say it's going to be Brian Daboll. I mean, all signs seem to be pointing to Daboll doing the play calling as opposed to Mike Kafka the first 2 years. And earlier this week, I had a guest on, Gary Myers, and he said, look, one of the reasons why the Giants hired Brian Daboll was because he was so creative as a play caller in Buffalo, and he was able to get the most out of, the talent he had there. So that being said, for 2 years, Daniel Jones has had Mike Kafka in his ear. Do you think if they do indeed go with Daboll as the play caller, is that a plus, a minus? Is it going to require an adjustment? And how could the offense potentially look different with Daboll calling the plays versus Kafka?
It's a great question because being a play caller is all about having timing. You know, you have to have great timing as a play caller, but as a head coach, you have so much going on the sideline, and you can't be emotional. And what we have seen from Coach Daboll on the sideline, he's flying off the handle all the time, right? He's really emotional. He's locked in. He can be focused on one thing, so if he's going to call plays, that's going to require him to be a little bit more calm and kind of stay locked into what's going on out there on the field. Maybe because he didn't have the ability to call plays or wasn't calling plays was why he was flipping out and flying off the handle, right? And maybe him getting control of the play calling, if he's going to call plays, kind of can get him back to neutral and focus on what's working, what potential pitfalls are there, what's the best play in this possible situation to get the most out of the offense or the most out of the play. Maybe that can help him, get back to what got him the job. But also having a guy like Mike Kafka up top, who has been in Daniel Jones's ear for the last 2 years and who has seen what can work for Daniel Jones and all of them. I'm not saying Daboll doesn't know. I'm saying all of these guys are their staff, so they understand what works and what doesn't work, right? But having eyes up top, being able to communicate to the eyes that are field level as opposed to vice versa, could work for this offense. but it's going to be fascinating to see. I'll be interested to see. We'll never know the answer to this. Which voice does Daniel Jones prefer in his ear? And I think that's the more important factor. Like, who has a more calming presence to communicate effectively, that where he can go out there and just play fast without worrying about making a mistake. And so that dynamic is going to be fascinating to watch.
Yeah, that might be a question that I think we can pose to Daniel if he talks again, which I'm sure he will before the end of the year, or I should say the end of the spring. But that is a valid question as to which voice maybe he prefers. And I'm sure there's a way we can figure out how to ask him that. But, in terms of how the offense might change if Dable takes over the play calling, I mean, having studied him when he was up in Buffalo, is there a particular trend? I mean, I think up in Buffalo, if I'm not mistaken, he wasn't as into the run game. I think I think that was a complaint that a lot of Buffalo fans had with him. And you mentioned, of course, the concerns with the Giants' run game this year. So does that kind of just fall into place and make it the transition all the more likely?
Yeah, and I could see that potentially being the issue here. What could potentially happen also is that you got a bunch of catching backs, and you might use that short passing game as a supplement to your run game. You may see a lot more dump offs, a lot more screens set up, which could help calm the pressure and get the football out of Daniel Jones's hands quickly, um, to alleviate that. The yards are yards. It doesn't matter if you run it or if you throw it. But you kind of want running the football is important because you want to impose your will on defense. You wear them down. No one likes to get run on. It's a test. It's a physical game. It's still a mano game. Passing, yes, it can be effective, but at some point in time, you got to play big boy football and line up and run the ball. And that's where Buffalo has been having their issues. Well, both with Daboll and without Daboll, outside of last year, where they really started to focus on the run game and run the football, they were able to close out games. Prior to that, they weren't able to close out games and lose some games. And you put the ball in the hands of a guy that has led the league in turnovers, and Josh Allen. So you look at all of that and look at that with the Giants. It's like, man, you may potentially be putting your quarterback at risk of making a mistake, which he is prone to do, and he's coming off of a knee injury. So you don't know if he still has that, or when he's going to be able to showcase that athleticism to really evade pressure, be a +1 in the run game, or be a +1 to where the defense can't really just tee off on the pocket because they're afraid he's going to take off. So there's a lot that is involved, or that is at play here, with trying to lean more 60-40 pass run, as opposed to about 55-45. So it could come back to bite the Giants. But if you look at the backs that they've brought in, the type of receivers they brought in, I'm projecting, I could be completely wrong here, but I'm projecting that they're looking to play the short, quick passing game and let these guys make one miss or get chunk plays, then take the timely shot deep down the field with the neighbors or Hyatt. But I feel like we've seen a lot of catch and run guys at receiver. We've seen a lot of pass catching backs that are about the same size in the backfield, and maybe that they're going to try to old school West Coast offense their way to success this year.
Emory, final question for you. This Giant team, they need to turn it around. They need to do better than 6-11. What's going to be the biggest X factor in them achieving that?
Whew. Oh man. Quarterback play. It really, in today's game, not to say one guy is the end all be all, but they've created, the way the rules have been created and crafted, they kind of put a lot of the onus on having a guy that you can trust to go out there and help you win games, and also play above the X's and O's. The Giants just don't have that right now. Uh, and if we're just talking about the division, based off their college careers, the Giants have sitting right now at 4th in that regard in terms of quarterback. You got to like Jayden Daniels more than Daniel Jones. We obviously know who the top two quarterbacks in the division are, and Hurts and Prescott. It's hard. It's really hard to look at this and see them being able to win those games against guys that may be on the other side that you feel like is better than the guy that you have at quarterback. And I think that's the biggest problem right now, or hindrance, or potential pitfall for the Giants this season.
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely a question mark, and like like you were saying earlier, they're backing Daniel Jones, and they have been, but yet they put all the resources into looking into other quarterbacks, and there was a lot of talk, not just from one source, but multiple sources, that they tried to trade up to get another quarterback. And to me, that always says, well, if you're looking to draft ahead, how much faith do you really have in the guy? It's like you have faith, but hey, I can do better,
Right. And you saw the Falcons, was like, hey man, we're here. We don't expect to be here often. Just take the guy that we feel like strongly is that guy. You wonder who the Giants, and this is a little bit off track, but you wonder who the Giants had in mind at the time they picked Neighbors, as a contingency plan, that they couldn't, hey, we can't get up and get the guy we want. Who was our next guy? Because after they picked Neighbors, we saw three other quarterbacks go, right? We saw Penix, we saw McCarthy, we saw Nix go. So it makes you wonder, like, what they thought of those guys as opposed to trying to go up and get that guy, or was the trade to go up and get that guy more smokescreen to show effort? Hey, yeah, we were trying to make a move for a guy, but we couldn't get there. Like, I feel like it's all smoke. I feel like they didn't feel strongly enough to go and get that guy up at number 3, as reported, and they didn't too much care for the guys behind them, but the Falcons did. You know what I'm saying? And so I just feel like they weren't even in the market for a quarterback per se. They were going to always ride with the guy they got this year, and that's why they brought in the veteran, in Drew Lock, a startable veteran, as opposed to saying, okay, well, we'll just grab a rookie of one of these 6 and roll with that guy behind Daniel Jones. So I feel like the quarterback movement was a little bit of more smoke than anything.
Well, I mean, it also takes two sides to make a trade. And the Patriots, in my opinion, they just weren't interested in trading. It's like, oh, yeah, well, listen, but, it probably would have taken 100 first-round draft picks for them to move out of that spot. And then I give credit to Joe Shane for really not, panicking and reaching for a quarterback, because you can make the argument that that's kind of how the Giants got into this situation to begin with back in 2019, when everybody thought Daniel Jones might go somewhere in the teens, and now here he is, he's going 6th overall. So, I mean, that's how I viewed it, whether or not that's accurate or not, but that's how I kind of looked at it. But so anyway,
yeah, it'd be interesting if they, Penix was right there, so that's going to be fascinating to watch. We'll never know these answers because we'll never get an honest answer. But quarterback is the biggest pitfall, because look around the NFC. Let's say the Giants are chasing the 7th seed, which is plausible because I feel like the Giants defense is going to be good. And they do have a good offensive line. Had they had Saquon, this offense, I feel strongly about them winning 7 or 8 games and potentially put themselves in position for that 7th seed. But let's look at the teams they're potentially fighting for that 7th seed with: Washington, Chicago, maybe whoever you feel as though can. I feel like the Saints defense is going to be great. The Falcons have a veteran in Kirk Cousins, in Atlanta. The Bucks are coming off the playoffs. So whoever you feel like can win the South, there's going to be a second team that'll finish second, that will be in play for the 7th seed. And then you look at the whole West, like outside of San Francisco, who should win that division, Seattle, Arizona, and the Rams will all be fighting for that 6th or 7th seed. Do you feel like the Giants can potentially play against any one of those bunch of teams that I mentioned? That's where the discussion has to start and will probably end, based off who the Giants have under center.
Yeah, it's definitely going to be fascinating. I mean, we'll find out soon enough. I mean, it always goes by quickly. Emory, I want to thank you for coming on and talking ball. It's always great to talk ball with you. I mean, it's just, we could probably go on easily another hour if we needed to, but I know you got things to do. So I appreciate you coming on. He's Emory Hunt. You can find him on CBS Sports. You can also find his work on Football Game Plan. Please check him out. The guy does nonstop scouting year round. He's always working in his lab, and he does his homework, folks. I mean, that's, if nothing else, you got to respect him for really being thorough and doing his homework. And I'm so glad to be able to call you a friend, Emory. So thank you for coming on. Giant fans, thank you for tuning in. We will be back tomorrow with an all new episode of Locked On Giants. I'll have takeaways from the next OTA practice, media takeaways, practice takeaways, all the good stuff you've come to expect. So until tomorrow, I'm Patricia Traina for Emory Hunt. We will see you tomorrow, Giant fans.